The amendment is considered as read, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purpose of further amendment. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for a statement on the bill and the amendment. I strongly support the District of Columbia Cash Bail Reform Act. This bill requires pretrial detention for individuals charged with crimes of violence and dangerous crimes, and cash bail for individuals charged with public safety and order crimes. For far too long, dangerous criminals have been allowed to roam the streets of D.C., posing a threat to the general public. Before this bill, progressive judges could release criminals to D.C. streets with only a promise that they will not reoffend and will return to court for their trial date. This bill eliminates this judicial discretion by requiring pretrial detention for those charged with crimes of violence and cash bail or bail bonds for all defendants charged with certain public safety and law and order crimes. This is a smart and long overdue reform that rectifies the ill-conceived policies currently enacted in the district. I urge all of my colleagues to support this common sense public safety bill. I now recognize the ranking member for his statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I strongly oppose the D.C. Cash Bail Reform Act, and I wanted to share why. This bill once again interferes with D.C. law and makes major changes to D.C.'s pretrial release and detention law. Now, the bill would require pretrial detention based solely on a charge. It will also prevent pretrial release for certain crimes unless a defendant posts a secure appearance bond. Now, no one on this committee wants dangerous people on the streets after they've been arrested. But D.C.'s pretrial release and detention law is actually substantially similar to the federal pretrial release and detention law in place. Now, under both D.C. and federal law, right now, pretrial release and detention decisions are based on an assessment by a judge of a defendant's risk of flight and danger to the community. And that's how it should be. In our system, you are innocent until proven guilty. Detention decisions should be made based on risk, not on wealth or your access to pay. The Pretrial Service Agency for D.C. provides the pretrial services for both the U.S. District Court for D.C. and the D.C. Superior Court. It's actually a federal agency, and it is extremely effective by national standards. D.C.'s pretrial flight and rearrest rates are actually lower than the national rates. Now, this problematic bill has two main components. Component one is a mandatory pretrial detention for the period before trial based solely on a charge without necessary hearings, which is likely unconstitutional based on a 1987 Supreme Court ruling. And we're not aware, by the way, of any state, city, county, or territory that mandates pretrial detention for the period before trial based solely on a charge. We should stand for due process and reject this dangerous policy. Now, second, the other component of the bill that's incredibly problematic is the bill prohibits pretrial release for certain offenders unless a defendant posts a secured appearance bond. Pretrial release should be based on your danger to the public and your flight risk, not on your wealth. Pretrial detention can have significant consequences for a defendant and their family, including lost jobs, income, housing, and child custody. This bill would essentially lock up more people that are of low income in this community. And again, in pretrial, you are innocent until proven guilty. Now, finally, the data is clear that imposing financial conditions on pretrial release has no effect on crime rates. We should oppose the D.C. Cash Bail Reform Act on its merits. We should also oppose it because it violates D.C.'s self-government. And bill after bill being presented today moves back the ability for D.C. to govern itself. So I urge members to vote no on this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Boebert from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a fierce advocate for law and order, I support Congresswoman Stefanik's District of Columbia Cash Bail Reform Act. Our nation's capital is reeling from crime crisis, worsened by cashless bail policies that let violent criminals, murderers, rapists, carjackers walk free before trial, endangering residents, federal workers, and visitors. Democrats have proven they are not soft on crime, they are pro-crime. They are pro-carjacking, pro-rape, pro-murder, pro-criminals with these policies. This bill restores accountability, ensuring safety in Washington, D.C. The statistics are absolutely alarming. In 2023, D.C. reported 274 homicides, a 20-year high, with a rate of 39.4 per 100,000 residents, surpassing New York City's 5.5 and rivaling Chicago's. Carjackings surged 547% from 2018 to 2023, with 140 incidents in June of 2023 alone. While 2024 saw a 35% drop in violent crime, homicides down to 32% to 187, robberies down 39%, and armed carjackings down 53%. 2025 data shows that 99 homicides by August, a 12% increase from 2024, but still, that is troubling. Total violent crimes in 2024 hit 22,320, with 21,437 assaults. Motor vehicle thefts up 9% in 2025 and reached 3,136 by September. These numbers absolutely demand action. Cashless bail fuels this very chaos, creating a revolving door for repeat offenders. To see how cashless bail is working in real time, let's look at what happened to Irana Zurich. So I'm so sorry for saying her name wrong. I will get the Ukrainian language down, but the wonderful woman who was violently murdered just this week, a Ukrainian refugee seeking safety in Charlotte. She was brutally murdered on a train by a man with a violent past, and was repeatedly released despite prior arrests for robbery, assault, and erratic behavior. This man has been arrested and let go 14 times due to Democrats' pro-crime policies. Cashless bail and lenient pretrial policies let dangerous individuals cycle through our streets, endangering innocent lives like Irana's. We need to take action to ensure repeat offenders aren't free to murder innocent victims, and so no family endures such senseless loss again. Cashless bail promotes this kind of violence. There was no help for this man that was actually enforced. He was not institutionalized. He was not forced to seek help, and he was let go 14 times to repeat these kind of crimes. And this is the same thing that we see in Washington, D.C. when we have cashless bail. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentlelady yields. Chair recognizes Ms. Norton from Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I strongly oppose this bill, which amends D.C. law. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record letters opposing the bill from D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, the entire D.C. Council, and D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwab.
Without objection, so ordered.
This bill is paternalistic and undemocratic. The over 700,000 D.C. residents, the majority of whom are black and brown, are capable and worthy of governing themselves. The D.C. Council has 13 members. If residents do not like how the members vote, residents can vote them out of office or pass a ballot measure. This is called democracy. Congress has 535 voting members. D.C. residents do not like how the members vote on local matters. Residents cannot vote them out of office or pass a ballot measure. This is the antithesis of democracy. While the substance of this bill is irrelevant, since there is never justification for Congress to legislate on local D.C. matters, I will briefly discuss it. The D.C. law is not unique. The fact is, it is very similar to the federal pretrial release and detention law, and the same well-regarded federal agency provides pretrial services in both the federal and local trial courts in D.C. Under both federal and D.C. law, federal and detention decisions are based on a defendant's wealth, not on any assessment of by a judge or whether a defendant will appear and is a danger to another person or the community. Nevertheless, judges have the authority to impose financial conditions on release. Detention is a severe restriction on the liberty of an individual who is presumed innocent. This bill mandates pretrial detention without a hearing for certain crimes, that it likely violates the the due process clause of the Constitution. I urge the majority to read the Supreme Court's 1987 decision that upheld the constitutionality of federal pretrial and detention law. The court stressed the law's procedural protections for defendants. The court said, quote, in our social liberty is the norm, and detention prior to trial or without trial is the carefully limited exception. We hold that the provisions for pretrial detention in the Home Rule Act of 1984 fall within that carefully limited exception. The Act authorizes the detention prior to the trial of arrestees charged with serious felonies who are found after an adversary hearing to pose a threat to the safety of the individuals, to the community, which no condition release can dispel. The numerous procedural safeguards detailed above must attend this adversary hearing, close quote. This bill requires pretrial detention without any adversary hearing. Finally, the bill introduces commercial bail industry.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
I yield back.
Thank you. Is there anyone else, who else seeks recognition? Oh, Mr. Lynch. I'm going to recognize Mr. Lynch for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to associate myself with the remarks of the ranking member earlier. I do want to point out that this statute, this change in the law, would expand the number and type of offenses against public safety or public order that now apply in Washington, D.C. I think
I didn't say it.
the ranking member earlier spoke to the impact of the residents of D.C., and I just want to add another dimension to this. As we all know, Washington, D.C. is the place where the American people often come to exercise their right to petition their government. Throughout our history here in D.C., going back to the veterans' protests, the bonus army in 1932 during the Depression, going back to Dr. King's rally in support of jobs and freedom, where 500,000 people followed him here for the purpose of petitioning their government. You can look at the Black Lives Matter rallies that occurred more recently the Women's March back in 2020, and so many others. This law as written, would introduce pretrial detention for anyone charged with an offense against public safety or public order. The current statute in Washington, D.C., which is amended by this, currently regards excessive noise or behavior which may disrupt the tranquility of the community as an offense against public safety or public order. So this will impinge not only upon the daily activities of the people of Washington, D.C., but it will also, I believe, violate the constitutional right of the American people to come here and to petition their own government. They will now, after this bill is passed, be exposed to detention pre-trial, detention without recourse, detention that will continue unless they make bail, which is new and different. So, look, I've been a part-time resident of Washington, D.C. for almost 25 years. And from my own experience, having been here 4 days a week, 5 days a week for the past 25 years, things have gotten a lot better in D.C. Things have gotten a lot better. I remember when we had significant challenges. That is not the case today. We have an excellent police force. We have wonderful leadership at the city council level. And we've had a string of mayors here that I think have tried their level best to do what is right and to represent the people of the district, the residents of the district, even though we have curtailed those rights by statute. This is an assault on the self-determination of the residents of Washington, D.C., and they deserve better than this. They deserve better than this. It is one thing to have the burden of living here without active representation. It is quite another to have Congress intervene on the basic functions of daily life that the people of D.C. endure and go about each and every day. This series of bills is an overreach, and we should defeat it and return the right to make those decisions back to the mayor, the district city council, and the people of Washington, D.C. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Mimfume.
Mr. Chairman, the distinguished gentlewoman from the District of Columbia did not have enough time in making the points that she was trying to make, so I would respectfully yield the balance of my time to her.
You're recognized. He's yielded time to you, Ms. Bowden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Finally, this bill introduces the commercial bail industry and bounty hunters into local D.C. courts. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill and to pass the D.C. Statehood bill instead, which will give D.C. residents voting representation in Congress and full social self-government. Full local self-government. D.C. is not unique. In fact, it is very similar to the federal pretrial release and detention law, and the same well-regarded federal agency provides pretrial services in both the federal and local trial courts in D.C. under both federal and DC law. Release and detention decisions are based not on a defendant's wealth, but on an assessment by a judge of whether a defendant will appear and is a danger to another person or the community. Nevertheless, judges have the authority to impose financial conditions on release. Detention is a severe restriction on the liberty of an individual, which is presumed innocent. This bill mandates pretrial detention without a hearing for certain crimes. That likely violates the Due Process Clause of the Constitution. I urge the majority to read the Supreme Court's 1987 decision that upheld the constitutionality of the federal pretrial and detention law. The count stressed the law protections by defendants. The court said, quote, in our society, liberty is the norm, and detention prior to trial or without trial is the carefully limited exception. We hold that the provisions for pretrial detention in the Bail Reform Act of 1984 fall within that carefully limited exception. The act authorizes the detention prior to trial of arrestees charged with serious felonies are found after an adversarial hearing to pose a threat to the safety of individuals or to the community which no condition or release can dispel. The numerous procedural safeguards or detail above must attend this adversarial hearing, close quote. This bill requires pretrial detention without an adversarial hearing. Finally, this bill introduces the commercial bail industry and bounty hunters into local courts. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill and to pass DC's Statehood bill instead, which will give DC residents voting representation in the Congress and full local government.
Are you yielding back?
Yeah, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I urge my colleagues to oppose the Cash Bail Reform Act that would create standards that do not exist anywhere else in this country. Let's be clear, these arguments that Republicans are now attaching themselves to when it comes to cash bail are nothing more than propaganda and fear-mongering and hatred of poor people. Nearly this entire slate of bills up today shows that they hold the citizens of D.C., who are disproportionately black and brown, with less regard than their own constituents. Policies like these do nothing more than dehumanize and criminalize and subject D.C. residents to standards that are unconstitutional at best. This bill would mandate pretrial detention for certain charges and attach mandatory cash bail amount for a slew of other charges. Pretrial detention means that this person has only been accused of committing a crime. They haven't been found guilty. They haven't gone in front of a jury. The state hasn't proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt. It seems Republicans have forgotten about innocent until proven guilty in the Fifth Amendment, core tenets of our democracy. Our Constitution ensures that anybody accused of a crime cannot be denied their life, their liberty, or their property without due process of the law. But this bill would take away someone's liberty, their freedom, and hold them in a jail cell on nothing more than an accusation. This bill conditions release not on whether a person poses a threat to public safety, but on whether they can afford to pay to get out. We're not in a country where one is presumed guilty just because they're black or they're poor, but they're assumed innocent just because they're a white-collar criminal. It's no shock that Trump and Republicans want you to believe that having more money makes you more deserving of release because they have money. But the fact remains that rich defendants accused of a crime are not inherently less dangerous than poor defendants. How does having access to cash have anything to do with the safety or the risk of a person? Right now, how it works in DC is that a judge will listen to factors about the person accused of a crime, such as their ties to the community, their employment, where they live, the charges themselves, and they'll determine the conditions of release without requiring money. Those judges can then allow detention of people who they think can't be safely released or trusted to return to court. These policies in DC have been on the books since 1992, and the data speaks for itself. Over the last 4 years, 88% of all people released pre-trial remain completely arrest-free, and 98% remain free from violent arrests. These changes to the system took place because they're connected to data that shows no relationship between cashless bail and crime, and many other states have followed suit. The Brennan Center used data from 33 states and examined their laws in detail. So it categorized them based on how they work, when they went into effect. The result carefully studied whether crime rates changed after reforms were implemented. The research found no clear relationship one way or another. The one industry that has suffered from DC's current cashless bail system is the for-profit bail bondsman industry. They don't operate in the districts anymore, but you can bet that if this bill passes, they're going to be rushing back to grow their already $2.4 billion industry. Further, of course, lining their pockets of rich folks at the expense of poor folks. When a person's freedom is at stake, they deserve to be heard as an individual rather than painted with a broad brush. That's called due process. It's also why it's so important for folks to have an attorney during these hearings, which is why I introduced the True Justice Act, to provide grants to public defender offices to expand their services to include bail hearings, because not every jurisdiction provides that representation. To be clear, this bill would strip the due process rights of people who have not been proven guilty yet. It's shameful, Republicans, to put forward this bill, and I urge my colleagues to oppose it. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Bell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to add a little bit of nuance here because there's two conversations we should be having. There's low-level nonviolent offenders, and then there's serious and violent offenders. Serious offenders, you're not going to find many judges that are releasing people that are charged with murder, homicide, and rape. And by the way, was a prosecutor before coming to Congress, and so the gentlelady's assertion that all Democrats are pro-crime, pro-rape, pro-murder is insulting. I locked up rapists and murderers and drug dealers, hundreds of them, and I'm not sure how many the gentlelady has done. And so, but with low-level nonviolent offenders, the problem is that when you require bail on cases like these, and in this amendment, there is discretion because it says crimes that are a clear threat to public safety and order. So that means low-level offenders, if a judge used their discretion, could be kept in prison for low-level offenses because they impacted, quote-unquote, public order. And what you'll have is the reason why we see cash bail not working is because, as far as with low-level offenders, is that the rich murderer can purchase his freedom while the college student who forgot to pay a ticket or they got picked up on a small amount of drugs and they can't make the $1,000 bond, well, they can't get out. And what we've seen is that if you want to make our community safer, prisons aren't the way to do it. Our recidivism rates across the country after 10 years are 80%. That means 8 out of 10 people are going back. So if you want to create criminals, put them in jail, because that's what happens. They come out and they're more likely to reoffend. When we take low-level, nonviolent offenders and address those root causes, the substance abuse, the mental health, the addiction, when we address that, the data shows they are significantly less likely to reoffend. We created a diversion advisory committee in St. Louis County for low-level, nonviolent offenders. Remember that 80% number I talked about? Of the 5,000, close to 5,000 people that we were able to get in our program, our recidivism rate was 3.9%. That means 96% of the people were not offending. We were connecting them with jobs. We were connecting them with health care. We were connecting them with housing, the things that they needed and that correlate with a lack of recidivism. So when we're going backwards, because we already actually saw this problem and recognize that that cash bail for low-level nonviolent offenders doesn't work. It actually makes us less safe. And so we got to make sure that we're understanding the nuance and the policies that actually work, as opposed to the things that are just good to hear on a campaign commercial or what have you. And so that's why I joined my colleague, Representative Norton, in opposing this bill, because it doesn't work. I yield the remainder of my time to the ranking member, if he so chooses to take it.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
No, go ahead. I think he's yielded to you. Oh, okay. Gentleman yields time has expired because of that. And now I'll recognize myself for my 5 minutes. So I support the bill, the underlying bill. And I just want to, there's so much to say, but I'm going to just limit it, and I'm going to introduce these articles in just a moment. But Mayor Bowser, I've had the pleasure to meet with her on numerous occasions, talking about these types of issues. And she's a pleasant person, and I think she's sincere, and I think she wants to do her best for the district. In August 13th, she said, quote, "I can't say that given some of the rhetoric regarding President Trump's rhetoric of the past that we're totally surprised about his," and she said that relating to his, the National Guard coming in. And then so minutes later, as this is from a CNN article, it says, minutes later, she suggested the federal intervention may work to the city's benefit and told reporters she didn't have the legal authority to stop Trump's plans. Quote, "The fact that we have more law enforcement and presence in neighborhoods, that may be positive," she said. And then she didn't like the ICE, the presence of ICE in the district. And then the following day, this is from the article again, she responded to a question about her relationship with Trump, saying, "I'm the mayor and he's president. I mean, that's always been our relationship. And the DC mayor and the president of the United States will always have probably more interaction than any city in the rest of our country. So we're going to keep doing our job." And that's really kind of what Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 would imply, as the gentleman from Louisiana talked about earlier. Another article dated August 27th, the mayor said this, quote, "We greatly appreciate the surge of officers that enhance what MPD has been able to do in this city," Bowser said at a press conference, quote, "The difference between this 20-day period of this federal surge and last year represents an 87% reduction in carjackings," close quote. She went on to say that she had a courtesy meeting with the president, and she suggested the surge of hundreds of federal law enforcement officers had filled a gap left by attrition and slow hiring in the D.C. Police Department, something that had been a concern of hers long before Trump's emergency declaration. And I know that's true because that was one of the topics when I met with Mayor Bowser previously. Quote, "We need at least 500 new officers to hire 500 new officers over the course of the next several years to have the number of officers that we need and to decrease the amount of overtime that we use," Bowser said. And then just from last week, late last week, Mayor Muriel Bowser has issued an order requiring ongoing local coordination with Donald Trump's federal takeover of Washington, D.C. Her order, this is another quote, her order also establishes a safe and beautiful emergency operations center whose role will be to manage the district's response, coordinate centralized communications, and ensure coordination with federal law enforcement to the maximum extent allowable by law within the district. Trump thanked her for her cooperation. I raise this because I hear what my colleagues across the aisle say, and I'm hearing what our side says, but the reality is you can't deny that there's been improvement in the district since the federal participation here. The mayor herself has said that. You just can't deny that. And when you take that and you couple that with the constitutional authority delegated, not just delegated, but mandated to the Congress, then it says maybe we're not doing things wrong, but maybe we need to fix things just a little bit more. And for that reason, I support this bill and submit these without objection into the record. And I so ordered. And I'm going to yield back my time. Who else seeks recognition? Anyone? Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to comment regarding cash bail, generally speaking, because my colleague across the aisle, and we thank him for his service as a prosecutor and now here in Congress, and we respect his opinion and his passion for his core principles. And yet, the observations regarding cash bail and how it actually works in the reality of the conflict between law enforcement and the criminal element in our judicial system at its entry level, his assessment was wrong and requires correcting. The so-called low-level crimes that the gentleman would say absolutely should not have cash bail. A low-level crime becomes a high-level crime when somebody's home and the criminal didn't think somebody was going to be home. Like a burglary. You go into a home, they think the home's empty. That's a burglary. But if someone's homesick or whatever, and they respond, that can quickly escalate into something far worse than a burglary. So it's the same criminal actor out there that's committing these crimes. And when you remove cash bail, you remove that period of time where that criminal, who is a child of God, a fellow citizen, they have an opportunity in jail to step back from the elements that have perhaps driven them into criminal behavior in the first place. Drugs, alcohol, a violent sort of an immersion into some of the components that create the criminal lifestyle. And if they get arrested, now they don't get arrested for every crime. You don't get a speeding ticket every time you're speeding, do you? So when there's an arrest of somebody, there's generally many unknown crimes similar that they have committed. So they get arrested. They have to go before a magistrate within 48, 72 hours, depending upon the state and the municipality. And then that magistrate, according to the law, it's a set bond. And if there's no cash bond, then that criminal, he doesn't have the means, you understand, to pay a cash bond. That's part of the matrix to determine in these municipalities that have established no cash bonds. And they give discretion to the judge. You say, can you pay a cash bond? The guy says no. Says, okay, there's no cash bond. He's immediately back out on the street. So we as a people have not given that man, that child of God, that opportunity that he has forced upon himself by his actions to sit in jail for a week or two. And it may be the first week or two in a long time and has had no alcohol, no drugs,
Let the
no
gentleman
immersion
yield.
in violence. And to give him an opportunity to reflect upon his life. Like this happens in jail. But if he's in and out of the courtroom at his magistrate's hearing immediately after arrest or quickly within a day or two after arrest, and he doesn't have to call someone to ask him to come post his bond, which is 10% of the, generally 10 to 15% nationwide to pay a bail bondsman. So if it's $1,000 bond, he has to come up with 100 or two. But he don't have that. So he calls his friends. He calls his family. And they don't want to pay because they've been burned before by the same guy. So he ends up in jail for a period of time, a week or two, a month. And it's that time frame, Mr. Chairman, that this man, this child of God, has an opportunity to get his mind right. And I think we have a responsibility as a society to consider that totality of circumstance as it relates to cash bail. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gill, for 5 minutes.
And I'd like to yield my time to Congresswoman Boebert.
Thank you very much for yielding. I just wanted to highlight some points here. Under current law, the District of Columbia has a very pro-crime pretrial release system. With few exceptions, the DC Code requires judges to release all but the most heinous offenders on their own recognizance or after pledging an unsecured appearance bond. Shockingly, under current law, someone could be charged with murder and released prior to their trial date. The District of Columbia Cash Bail Reform Act addresses this problem by directly fixing DC laws on bail and pretrial detention. The bill establishes a tiered system of increasingly appropriate pretrial conditions based on the seriousness of the crime. There's been many arguments here just trying to diminish this to a traffic ticket or a small offense, but it is based on the seriousness of the crime. For the most egregious crimes, those defined in statute as dangerous crimes and crimes of violence, the judge is required to impose a pretrial detention of the offender. These crimes include terrorism, assault of a police officer, carjacking, child sexual abuse, murder, as well as other heinous crimes that we see all too often here in our nation's capital. This bill would also require mandatory cash bail for serious crimes that pose a threat to public safety and order, including fleeing a police officer, rioting, and stalking, among others. For such serious crimes, those defined in the bill as public safety and order crimes, requires cash bail as a condition of pretrial release. For all other crimes, the bill retains the current law process for pretrial release. Conditions for anyone eligible for pretrial release include refraining from committing other crimes and the collection of defendants' DNA. For all defendants eligible for pretrial release, the judge may apply additional escalating sanctions, including curfews, retaining to custody outside of hours of employment, and other conditions the judge deems appropriate to ensure the public safety and compel appearance at hearings. Current DC code allows judges to release those convicted of crimes who are awaiting sentencing or appeal if the judge feels the convict will not flee and does not propose danger to others. The bill also eliminates this judicial discretion and requires detention upon conviction. No longer will progressive judges be able to release criminals to the streets of the district with only a promise that they will not reoffend and will show up in court. It will remove radical progressive loopholes that allow violent offenders to roam the streets of the district, posing a threat to residents and visitors. Those charged with obstruction of justice, fleeing from law enforcement, rioting, destruction of property, or stalking will no longer receive the least restrictive conditions for release, sometimes no bail at all. This is a smart and long overdue reform that rectifies the ill-conceived D.C. Council cash bail and pretrial detention reforms represented by the Bail Reform Amendment Act of 1992, D.C. Law 9-125. Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to
Will the gentlelady yield?
provide some clarity. Sure, I'll yield for a moment.
It's actually Mr. Gill controls the time.
I apologize. I yield to Mr. Gill.
Will the gentleman yield?
It's up to you, sir.
No.
Gentleman will not yield. Mr. Gill, do you yield your time back to the chair?
Yes.
Thank you. Who else seeks recognition? Seeing none, the question is now on the amendment and the nature of a substitute. All those in favor signify by voting aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.